Hello, this is Kenneth Wong. Welcome to another episode of DE Podcast. Glad to have you along. When you walk into a forest in a VR application, can you smell the berries and the lilies? When you enter a virtual baseball stadium, can you smell the hot dogs? If OVR has something to do with your application or your game, you just might. OVR stands for Olfactory Virtual Reality, and today we are speaking with the company's CEO, Aaron Wisniewski. Aaron, welcome. In our sector, manufacturing and engineering, people tend to use AR, VR hardware and software for training. So, for example, maybe they want to use it to see how a vehicle is going to look and feel before it is built. But people might also be thinking this is more important for me to understand where the dashboard is and where the knobs are. I really don't need to smell the leather. What do you say? Why is smell important?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Kenneth. I'm very happy to be here. And I would be, one of the first to say that not all VR and AR applications benefit equally from scent. The same way that not all audio experiences necessarily need surround sound, and not all visual experiences require, 5K HD. The important distinction that we make is what is the desired outcome. In the case of, a voicemail or a document scan, the intent is to convey a message with the least amount of information necessary. An automotive designer, although I'm not one, I assume that in many cases is not just designing a hunk of metal and plastic. They're designing an idea, and they want people to respond to that idea favorably. They want people to, in some cases, fall in love with that idea. And in that case, it's critical to engage people emotionally. Most people think that they make decisions, especially purchasing decisions, with their rational mind. People, consider themselves very rational, but we now know that about 95% of purchasing decisions are made in the subconscious emotional mind. And I say purchasing decisions, kind of loosely. It could be a financial purchase. It could be just subscribing to a brand or an idea. And to use the automotive designer analogy, I think Rolls-Royce is a great example of, how important the sensory experience is, whether showing, someone you work with or a potential customer, as they change the materials that they were producing the cars with, they began to smell differently and sales began to drop. And so once they figured out what the reason that sales were dropping is people were not having the same emotional experience when they interacted with the car as they were when they smelled leather and wood and all of those classic Rolls-Royce smells. So they spent a considerable amount of money to figure out what that smell was of a 1965 Rolls-Royce and then reintroduce that to the more modern Rolls-Royces. So I think that is, the perfect example of how important smell is, even though it's subconscious, to get the most powerful experience. Even if you're just conveying information, especially design information, that scent can be, a critical part of that.
What's your vision for the recently announced hardware and scent kit, by the way? It's called Architecture of Scent. Do you envision selling it as an add-on to certain VR apps? For example, if somebody is selling a first-person shooter game set in an old western town, would you consider selling the kit that is loaded with scents that are already configured for old barns and gunfires and so on?
So the architecture of scent platform is leveraging three intersecting points. One of them being the hardware component, which is the microtechnology that we developed that affixes to the VR mask. The software component, which is the part that understands your behavior in the virtual world, translates it, and then sends messages to the hardware component. And then finally, the scentware component, which is us decoding the sensory world around us and recreating it in our lab. And so, although I love the imagery of that particular gaming example that you used, and I certainly don't want to say that, the architecture of scent will never reach the gaming market. Our vision is really to support better outcomes in healthcare, training, and education markets. We look towards those markets because we might have the biggest impact there. I'll look to one of our partners, Skip Rizzo at the University of Southern California, who invented a program called Brave Mind. And in that program, he's using it to treat veterans with PTSD. And he understands how powerful olfaction, our sense of smell, can be in those traumatic events, and also in the treatment for those traumatic events.
When people hear about artificially created scents in a lab, they may have knee-jerk reactions saying there are a lot of chemicals involved. So the question is then, how safe are those scents?
Absolutely, and this is a question that has been asked to me, even before my time at OVR, as someone who's been in the scent industry for a long time. So first of all, our scents are extremely safe. Every ingredient that we use, whether natural or quote unquote artificial, is certified by IFRA organization. We use well below any of the recommended thresholds and adhere to the most stringent guidelines that the fragrance, flavor, and cosmetic industry does. And we even take it one step further. So whereas other products might be solvent-based, so include alcohol or oils or waxes, ours are 100% water-based. The concept of chemicals is, I think, kind of a misunderstood one, because every time you breathe in, every time you smell a rose, every time you smell coffee or a toasted marshmallow, you are by nature inhaling chemicals. They happen to be natural organic chemicals that we are used to, and in our lab, all that we're doing is using those exact same chemicals and rebuilding those smells molecule by molecule. So by the time they're assembled, they look, they smell, and chemically are the same as the ones that you would find in nature. We just have complete control over how intense they are, really. And that's the way we're able to get so many scents, such a variety, and so complex in such a small amount of technology.
For practical purposes, suppose a VR application developer wants to trigger the scent of coffee when a particular cup is lifted up in a virtual environment. How does he or she go about coding it?
We made our software framework very user-friendly. So even if you don't know how to code necessarily, you can kind of plug and play. Our Unity framework is the one that we developed first. It's the most user-friendly and it's most widely adopted. So if you think about it like this, as kind of tagging objects within the virtual environment to be scent-enabled. In the real world, we're constantly bombarded by this, chaotic, swirling soup of smells, trillions and trillions of different, aroma compounds and chemicals bombarding us. We reimagined that as a set of geometries with predictable behavior. And by applying those geometries to assets within the virtual environment, the user will interact either knowingly or unknowingly with those geometries and trigger the release of scent. So to give you an example, so you might add a spherical system around the cup of coffee. So maybe a foot around that cup of coffee is where the smell of coffee would reach to. So as soon as the nose interacts with the outside of that sphere, you begin to smell coffee. The closer you get to the coffee itself, whether you're leaning forward or whether you pick the coffee up and you're bringing it to your mouth, the stronger and more intense the smell of coffee will get. And then as soon as you bring the coffee away from your nose, then you stop smelling coffee altogether. And the developer has complete control over the intensity of that smell, how large of an influence in the virtual play space that smell has, and even the shape of that smell, so a sphere, a cone, a box, a wave, they can manipulate how the VR user would experience that smell based on the set of geometries that we've included in the software framework.
Very good, very interesting, Aaron. Currently, we are under lockdown still, so of course, there is very little chance that I'm going to be able to physically experience architecture of scents. But one day when the lockdowns are lifted in a show floor or a conference, I hope to be able to try it out myself.
Well, I'm really looking forward to introducing you to the architecture of scent and seeing how you enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm Kenneth Wong for DE. Until next time, we are out.